My name is Rachel Okonkwo, and I am 31 years old. The night my father retired, he rented out the entire rooftop of the Meridian Hotel in downtown Houston. 300 guests, a jazz quartet, towers of shrimp on ice. My father walked to the center of the roof at exactly 9 o'clock, tapped his champagne glass with a pen the way men do when they believe the world is waiting for them, and said he had one announcement to make. He said the name of the company. He said the word legacy. He said his son had always understood what this business truly was. He turned to my brother Marcus, who was standing 4 feet to my left, and he said, "The Okonkwo Group is yours. Effective tonight. Carry it with pride." The crowd erupted. Marcus raised his glass. Someone started clapping, and it spread like a fire through dry grass. I held my own glass. I did not raise it. I did not drink. And here is what none of them knew. Not my father, not Marcus, not the 300 guests who thought they were celebrating a beginning. I had spent 11 months making sure that what Marcus was about to receive was already under federal review. At 9:04, while the applause was still going, I sent a text with one word. It said, "Confirmed." This is how it happened. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where we share real-life stories about family justice, quiet strength, and the moments that change everything. If this is your first time here, drop a comment below and subscribe so you never miss a story. To understand what happened at that rooftop party, you have to understand the Okonkwo Group. And to understand the Okonkwo Group, you have to understand my father. Emeka Okonkwo came to Houston from Lagos in 1987 with a civil engineering degree, $200 and a money belt, and a cousin who let him sleep on a couch for 3 months. He took a job with a mid-sized construction contractor, learned every piece of the business from the ground up, and by 1999 had started his own firm. By the time I was in middle school, the Okonkwo Group was a regional construction and project management company with a specialty in commercial infrastructure, warehouses, transit facilities, utility installations. Nothing glamorous. Functional, essential, profitable. By the time I graduated from Rice University with a degree in accounting and finance, it was a firm with 48 full-time employees, an annual revenue of $31 million, and a reputation for delivering projects under budget. I joined as a junior financial analyst at 23. Not because my father asked me, because I walked into his office one Tuesday morning with a 70-page restructuring proposal and told him his accounts receivable system was leaking approximately $400,000 a year in unbilled overruns. He hired me that week. By 26, I had rebuilt the billing and collection system from scratch. By 28, I had renegotiated 3 of our largest subcontractor agreements, saving the company $2.1 million over 2 contract cycles. By 30, I was the company's director of finance, the youngest director in the firm's history, the only woman in a leadership role above project coordinator. My flaw was this: I did not ask for credit. I fixed things and moved on. I believed that the work would speak for itself. I had been told this my entire life, and I had believed it for longer than I should have. Marcus joined the company 4 years after I did. He was 28. My father gave him the title of Vice President of Business Development, a company truck, an expense account, and an office with his name on the door in raised gold letters. Marcus had a degree in communications from a school in Louisiana and 3 years of experience selling commercial real estate. He was charming, loud in the right rooms, and very good at golf. He was also my father's only son. The Okonkwo Group had never had a formal succession plan. My father had never needed one, because in his mind, the plan was always obvious. He believed in what he called the foundation principle. He had said it to me once when I was 14, sitting in his truck on the way home from a school function. "A man builds so that his son can build higher," he said. He was not speaking to me. He was thinking out loud. I understood even then that I was not part of the equation. I did not argue with that version of my father. I had never argued with it. That was not weakness. That was a decision I had made at 14 and revisited only when the numbers stopped adding up. October, 16 months before the rooftop party. I was running the quarterly vendor reconciliation, which was my job, which I did every quarter, which no one else in the company fully understood. The reconciliation compared what the company had paid to subcontractors and suppliers against what had actually been delivered or invoiced against active projects.
It was a Tuesday.
The building was quiet by 6 in the evening. I had a cup of tea going cold on my desk and a spreadsheet open that was 400 rows long. One vendor appeared twice. Not twice in the sense of two invoices. Twice in the sense of two separate registered names routing to the same project codes. The first name was Pinnacle Site Services, LLC. The second was Pinnacle Construction Supply Group. Both had been active in our system for 14 months. Both fell under Marcus's division. Business development handled vendor onboarding. Both were billing us monthly. Combined, they had received $780,000 over those 14 months for services categorized as site preparation and material staging. I cross-referenced both against the project logs. Neither appeared in any active site report. Neither had produced a delivery receipt, a materials manifest, or a signed project completion form. In the Okonkwo Group's billing system, which I had built, those documents were mandatory before payment release. They had been bypassed on every single Pinnacle invoice. Someone with payment authorization had manually overridden the hold flags each time. I printed both vendor records. I put them in a folder. I closed the spreadsheet, shut off my monitor, and drove home. I did not go to my father. I did not go to Marcus. I had learned something from 11 years of watching how this company handled inconvenient information. Anything that implicated Marcus disappeared. Not maliciously. Quietly. My father would hear it, pause, say he would look into it, and then the subject would never come up again. I had seen it happen 3 times with performance concerns and once with a client complaint. The Okonkwo family had a way of absorbing problems that threatened Marcus and releasing them into silence. I was not going to let this one go into silence. I sat in my kitchen that night and opened my laptop. I searched for both Pinnacle entities in the Texas Secretary of State's Business Filings database. Pinnacle Site Services, LLC was registered 18 months prior. Registered agent. A legal services company in Dallas. Listed member. One individual named Jerome Tate. Pinnacle Construction Supply Group was registered 15 months prior. Same registered agent firm. Same member. Jerome Tate. I searched Jerome Tate. LinkedIn, no profile. BBB, no listing. Texas Contractor Registry. No license on file. No physical address associated with either business beyond a P.O. box in Beaumont. I made a second cup of tea. I did not drink it either. I sat with the folder and the laptop until 11 o'clock. Then I went to bed and did not sleep well. That was the beginning. November. First week. I requested the original vendor onboarding files for both Pinnacle entities from our administrative records coordinator, Sandra. Sandra had been with the company for 12 years. She filed things the way other people breathe, automatically, completely without drama. She found both files within an hour and left them on my desk without comment. Inside each file, a vendor application form, a certificate of insurance, and a signed approval form. The approval on both files carried Marcus's signature. The insurance certificates listed a policy number with a carrier I did not recognize, Patriot Commercial Underwriters, a name that did not appear in any of our standard vendor insurance databases. I called the carrier's listed phone number. It rang 4 times and went to a voicemail box that was full. I sent an email to the carrier's listed address asking to verify the policy. I received an auto-reply that said responses would take 7 to 10 business days. I never received a follow-up. The insurance certificates were false. I added them to the folder. The folder was now 41 pages. I put it in the locked bottom drawer of my desk at home, next to my passport and my grandmother's watch. I had worked in construction finance long enough to know what I was looking at. In the construction industry, vendor fraud through shell companies is one of the most common forms of financial crime. The structure is simple. A project manager or executive with vendor approval authority creates or partners with a shell company, routes payments to it for services never rendered, and splits the proceeds. It is old. It is common. It is almost always done by someone close enough to the authorization chain to override the controls. Marcus had override authority. I had given it to him myself, 14 months prior, when my father had asked me to extend payment approval access to the Business Development Division. I thought about that for a long time. December. The first submission. My cousin Adiz was a compliance attorney in Dallas. We had grown up together, spent every Christmas at my grandmother's house in Port Arthur, and talked on the phone every few weeks. She was not family company involved. She had no stake in the Okonkwo Group. She was also one of the most careful people I knew. I called her on a Saturday afternoon and said I needed to talk through something. Not for legal advice, just to think out loud to someone who understood the relevant laws. She listened for 35 minutes. When I finished, she was quiet. Then she said two things. The first, if the payments were fraudulent and they appeared in the company's financial records, which were also used for bonding, tax filings, and contractor licensing applications, then this was not just internal fraud. It was potentially wire fraud and possibly tax fraud, depending on how the income had been reported by the shell entities. The second thing she said was this: Rachel, if you go to your father with this, what happens? I knew the answer.
So, did she?
She told me about the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCEN, and the IRS whistleblower program. She also mentioned that the FBI's Financial Crimes Division maintained a tip line for suspected commercial fraud. She said the FBI tip was not confidential in the same way as the IRS program, but it was intake, not commitment. If the case had sufficient merit, it would be assigned and investigated independently of anything I did internally. I told her I would think about it. She told me to document everything before I did anything. She said it the way a person says something they have already thought about at length. That night I sat at the kitchen table and typed for 2 hours. I organized the Pinnacle vendor records, the registration documents, the insurance fraud, the payment history, and the override pattern into a single chronological document. 44 pages. I uploaded it to the IRS whistleblower portal and submitted. Submission confirmed at 11:53 p.m. A reference number appeared on the screen. 14 digits. I photographed it, put the photograph in an encrypted folder on an external drive, and locked the drive in the same drawer as the original folder. At work the following Monday, I arrived at 7 as always. Sandra nodded from her desk. The coffee was already made. I poured a cup and sat down and opened the quarterly project margin report my father had asked for. Every number was accurate. Every line was clean. That was the point.
January.
3 weeks later, my father called a leadership meeting. 7 people around the conference table. He said he had some news about the company's direction. He said he had been thinking about transition. He said Marcus would be moving into a co-principal role by spring. Full principal, his word for CEO, by the end of the calendar year. The company would be rebranded slightly, he said. Okonkwo Group and Son. He smiled when he said it. Nobody at the table looked at me. That was how I knew they had all heard it, before I had. I put down my pen. I asked a question. Has the board been consulted on succession governance? We had a 3-person advisory board, 2 outside construction industry veterans, and 1 former banker. My father looked at me the way a person looks when they are surprised to hear a foreign language spoken in their own house. This is a family decision, Rachel. The board will be informed. Informed, not consulted. Marcus was on the other side of the table. He said nothing. He did not need to. His expression was the expression of a man who had already opened the gift and was waiting for the rest of the room to catch up. My father's assistant, a quiet woman named Precious who had been with us for 9 years, caught my eye across the table for exactly 1 second. Then she looked back at her notepad. That evening, my mother called. She said she hoped I was proud of Marcus. She said my father had worked so hard for this. She said, "You know how your father is, Rachel. He has always believed in keeping it in the bloodline." There it was. The phrase, keeping it in the bloodline. I had heard it since I was a teenager. It was my mother's way of translating my father's beliefs into something softer, something almost kind. It meant, your brother is the heir. It meant, this was always the plan. It meant, please stop asking questions. I told her I was proud of everyone in the family. I hung up and opened the IRS portal. Status, under review. Reference, number confirmed. I closed the laptop. February. The second submission. The IRS whistleblower program had sent a secure message through the portal. A reviewer had been assigned. They requested additional documentation, specifically proof of payment flows, any evidence of the payments appearing in the company's tax-related filings, and any documentation linking the shell entity operators to company personnel. I had anticipated this. I spent 2 weekends pulling and organizing the materials. Vendor payment records for both Pinnacle entities, cross-referenced with our annual 1099 filings, which I had prepared, which meant I had full access. The 1099s showed payments to both entities. The IRS would now be able to trace whether those entities had reported the income. I suspected they had not. For the personnel connection, I went back to the trade show records. Marcus had attended the Gulf Coast Construction Expo in Galveston 20 months prior, 2 months before the first Pinnacle invoice appeared in our system. I pulled the company expense report from that trip, which Marcus had submitted and which had been approved by my father directly, bypassing my department. The expense report listed meals and transportation. It also listed one line item: vendor coordination dinner, $340, Pelican Grill, Galveston. I searched Jerome Tate and Galveston. Nothing. I searched Jerome Tate and Gulf Coast Construction Expo. A comment in a trade publications online forum from 19 months prior, from an account with the handle JT_site services, praising a panel discussion at the expo on subcontractor payment structures. JT, Jerome Tate. Booth registration records from the expo were publicly available on the event archive. Booth 94, Pinnacle Site Services. Attendee registration, general access. Marcus Okonkwo. I uploaded everything. Second submission confirmed. If you have ever watched someone receive a reward they did not build and stayed quiet in the meeting while it happened, you know the particular weight of that silence. If this story is reaching something you have felt before, subscribe and leave a comment below. I want to know I am not the only one who kept working while the room looked the other way. Now, let me tell you what I found in March. Something I did not expect. Desmond Adeyemi had been on our advisory board for 6 years. He was a 63-year-old former project executive who had run infrastructure programs for a major utility company before retiring. He and my father had met through a Houston civic organization and had become something close to friends, though my father did not have many of those. Desmond had always been kind to me, not in a patronizing way, in the way of someone who recognized what he was looking at and was not going to pretend otherwise. He had once told me, during an annual board review, that my accounts receivable restructuring was the most professionally executed internal reform he had seen in 30 years of working in the construction sector. He said it quietly, to me alone, after the meeting ended. My father had not been in the room. In March, Desmond called my cell phone on a Wednesday evening. He said he had been reviewing the company's bonding renewal application, which was board reviewed annually. He said something in the vendor cost allocations looked irregular to him. I asked him what specifically. He said 2 vendors under the business development division were coded as core operational subcontractors but had no associated project deliverables. He said he had flagged this in an internal note to my father 8 weeks prior and had received no response. I said I was aware of the irregularity. He said he knew I was. We were both quiet for a moment. Then he said, "However you are handling this, do not stop." That was the end of the call. I sat with that for a long time afterward. Desmond had seen it. He had tried the internal route. The internal route had gone nowhere, the way it always went nowhere when the path led back to Marcus. I was not taking the internal route. April. Something I had to do that I did not like. The Okonkwo Group hosted its annual subcontractor appreciation dinner every April. My father gave a speech. Marcus worked the room. I sat at the table for finance and operations and talked to people about payment cycles and project timelines. This year, Marcus was introduced as co-principal. The room applauded. My father stood beside him with his hand on Marcus's shoulder, beaming. I ate my chicken and drank my water and smiled when the camera came near our table. Precious found me by the buffet afterward. She refilled her plate, did not look at me, and said very quietly, "He approved another Pinnacle invoice this week. $240,000. It is in the March close. I said, I know. She said, I flagged it for you in the system. I said, I saw the flag. She moved on down the buffet line. I went back to my table. $240,000, the largest single Pinnacle invoice yet. I would find it in the system.
I would document it.
I would include it in the next submission. What I did not tell Precious was that I had already authorized it. Under the company's approval structure, any subcontractor payment above $100,000 required co-authorization from the Director of Finance. That was me. Marcus had submitted the invoice through the proper channel, which meant it landed on my desk with a routing slip. I looked at it for a long time. Then I signed it, not because I believed it was legitimate, because I needed it in the file. A current invoice, a current payment, my own signature on the authorization, which documented that I had processed it as part of my normal duties, not knowing at the time what the full picture would reveal. It was the cleanest possible evidence that the scheme was still active. Not historical. Not legacy. Ongoing. I processed the wire. I scanned the authorization. I uploaded it to the IRS portal the same evening as a supplemental filing. That night I stood in the kitchen for a long time looking at nothing in particular. I had signed a fraudulent payment. I had done it knowingly. I had done it because the alternative, blocking it without disclosing why, would have ended the investigation before it could end the fraud. I understood why it was necessary. Understanding why does not always make a thing feel clean.
May.
The physical document. My father kept his company's original executed contracts in a fireproof cabinet in his home office. Not the office at the firm, his house in Bel Air, the one he had bought in 2003 when the company first turned serious profit. My mother had redecorated it 3 times. The office had stayed the same since the day he moved in. Dark wood desk. Framed photos of construction projects. A gold pen set no one ever used. And the cabinet against the far wall, gray metal, for drawers. He kept a spare key in the center drawer of his desk, inside a ceramic dish shaped like a tortoise that my grandmother had given him. He had mentioned this once, years ago, in the context of explaining where I could find the original bonding certificate if I ever needed it urgently. He had told me and then forgotten he had told me. I went to my parents' house on a Sunday afternoon in May, as I often did. My mother made jollof rice. We ate together. My father read the paper. After lunch, my father fell asleep in his chair on the porch in the way he always did on Sunday afternoons. My mother went to the garden. I went to his office. The key was in the tortoise dish. Same place it had always been. I opened the 3rd drawer, original vendor contracts, ongoing. 12 folders. The 7th one was labeled Pinnacle Site Services. Inside, the original contract. Signed by Marcus as co-principal. Countersigned by Jerome Tate as managing member of Pinnacle Site Services, LLC. Scope of work, site preparation and material staging services. Deliverables. None specified. Duration. Open-ended. Payment. Monthly retainer. Amount. $55,000 per month. I photographed all 8 pages. Returned the folder. Locked the cabinet. Put the key back inside the tortoise. Walked back to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. My mother came in from the garden with her hands full of basil. Are you staying for dinner? I said I had an early morning. I drove home with the photographs on my phone and the weight of what I had just proven sitting somewhere in my chest like a stone.
June.
3rd submission. This one had faces. I uploaded the contract photographs. Marcus's signature clear and legible, Jerome Tate's countersignature beside it. I included the expo booth registration documentation. I included the vendor expense dinner line item from Marcus's Galveston trip report. I included the original LLC registration documents from the Secretary of State, listing Tate as sole member. And I included something new, a property record. Jerome Tate owned a house in Beaumont, Texas. The house had been purchased 14 months prior, 1 month after the first Pinnacle payment had been wired. Purchase price, $412,000. Cash transaction. No mortgage recorded. $412,000.
Cash.
1 month after $55,000 started flowing monthly from the Okonkwo Group through a company with no employees, no office, and no work product. I noted the timing in my submission narrative. I did not editorialize.
I did not need to.
The timeline said everything. The IRS whistleblower reviewer responded through the portal within 10 days. The message was brief. The submission had been escalated to the Criminal Investigation Division. A case file had been opened. They would be in contact through the secure portal if additional information was required. I was instructed not to discuss the matter with any party connected to the company. I closed the portal, made tea, drank it this time. August. My father announced the date of the retirement party. The Meridian Hotel rooftop. Second Saturday of October. 300 guests. He told me over the phone, in the same breath as asking whether I had sent a birthday card to my aunt in Lagos. It will be a beautiful night, he said. Your brother has worked hard for this. I said I would be there. I said I was happy for the family. I said I would wear something nice. That evening I opened my laptop and looked at the case file portal. Active. Under investigation. No action required. I had been waiting for 11 months. A few more weeks was nothing new. September. Something the IRS needed. A message through the portal. The criminal investigation team requested one additional category of evidence: documentation of my father's direct knowledge of or involvement in the Pinnacle payment structure. They had sufficient evidence on Marcus and Tate. To complete the case file at the level required for enforcement referral, they needed to establish whether the scheme had been sanctioned at the ownership level. I sat with that message for 4 days. My father was not an uncomplicated man. He had built something real from nothing. He had employed 48 families. He had paid my college tuition and my cousin Adiz. He had also, for reasons that made complete internal sense to him, spent 30 years looking past the daughter who had kept his company from falling apart in favor of a son who had helped dismantle it. I did not know whether he knew about Pinnacle specifically. I did not know whether Marcus had told him, or whether my father had simply chosen not to ask questions about a division he had handed to his son to run however he pleased. On the 5th day, I went back to the Belair house. A Tuesday afternoon. My father was at the office. My mother was at her Bible study group. I went with a reason. I had left a book there 2 weeks prior, which was true. The book was on the shelf in the guest room. I got the book. On the way out, I stopped at my father's office door. I went in. I opened the center drawer. Found the tortoise. This time I was looking for a different folder. In the second drawer, Correspondence, Current Year, there was a folder labeled MD, Internal. MD was my father's shorthand for Managing Director Decisions, the paperwork trail of choices he had made that he kept separately from the main administrative files. Inside, a printed email chain. 3 messages. Between my father and Marcus. Subject line, Pinnacle Q2 billing. The first email was from Marcus. Dad, Pinnacle invoice for Q2 attached. Jerome says the structure needs to stay the same, monthly retainer, no deliverables listed, or it flags compliance. Is that still okay with you? My father's reply 2 days later. Yes.
Keep it as is.
Rachel runs the quarterly audit, but I will handle it if she raises a flag. Make sure the insurance certs are refreshed. Marcus's reply the same day. Understood. Cert updated. Thanks. I read it 3 times. Rachel runs the quarterly audit, but I will handle it if she raises a flag. My father had known. He had known, and he had planned his response in advance, and the response had been to handle me, not to stop the fraud, to manage his daughter, if she noticed. I photographed both pages, returned the folder, replaced the drawer contents exactly as I had found them, put the key back in the tortoise, got the book from the guest room, left the house. In the car, I did not move for 12 minutes. I sat with the engine off in my parents' driveway and looked at my grandmother's street through the windshield. The same street I had ridden my bicycle on. The same driveway I had practiced parallel parking in at 16. Then I started the car and drove home and submitted the email chain to the IRS portal as a 4th and final supplemental filing. The portal confirmed receipt within the hour. October, 1 week before the party. My attorney, not Adiz, a separate attorney I had retained specifically for whistleblower protection purposes, called to confirm the case status. Her name was Vivian Cole. She was 54, direct, and had handled IRS whistleblower cases for 20 years. She said the Criminal Investigation Division had completed its preliminary review. The case was in the formal referral pipeline. Enforcement action, if pursued, would come through the Department of Justice. Timeline: uncertain, but the case was classified as active and substantial. She said one more thing. She said if I had any additional evidence I intended to submit, doing so before any public transfer of company ownership or control would strengthen the timing record.
The party was Saturday.
Marcus was being named co-principal Saturday night in front of 300 people. I told Vivian I had one more thing to prepare. I spent 5 days building a summary document, a complete timeline, first Pinnacle invoice, first IRS submission, escalation date, for supplemental filings, the email chain, the property purchase. 51 pages. Every piece of evidence cross-referenced. Every date logged. A narrative section written clearly enough for a prosecutor who knew nothing about the Okonkwo Group to understand the entire scheme in 30 minutes. I uploaded it as a draft on Thursday night. One gray button. Submit filing. I did not press it. I closed the laptop and went to bed.
Saturday.
The day of the party. I woke at 6:15, made coffee, sat at the table in the kitchen alone, and watched the light change in the backyard. There was a small persimmon tree in the corner of the yard that my downstairs neighbor had planted when she moved in 3 years ago. It had fruit on it now. Orange, round, heavy on the branches. I had not noticed it before that morning. My phone buzzed. Marcus. Sis, tonight is going to be something special. Dad went all out. Wait till you see the rooftop. I typed back. Cannot wait to see everyone. I put the phone face down on the table. My college roommate Aoife called at 10. She had no connection to the company and did not know what I was carrying. She called because she called every Saturday. I talked to her for 40 minutes about her daughter's soccer tournament and a television show I had not watched and whether I wanted to come to Galveston with her family in November. I said maybe. I meant yes. After we hung up, I showered, dried my hair, and wore it down, which I rarely did. I put on a deep burgundy dress I had bought in February and never worn. Silver earrings. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror for a moment. I looked like someone going to a celebration. That was the point. My best friend Kemi drove us both. She knew something was happening. She had known me long enough to read the particular stillness I carry when I am managing something large. She did not ask. She talked about a podcast she had been listening to, a renovation she was planning for her guest bathroom, a mutual friend's new job. 40 minutes from my apartment to the Meridian Hotel. Red tail lights on the highway. The city at night. In the hotel elevator, she took my hand and squeezed once. Not the squeeze of fear. The squeeze of, I am here. Whatever you need. I squeezed back. Then the doors opened and we walked out onto the rooftop. The rooftop at the Meridian was everything my father did when he did things. Open sky. Houston spread out in every direction. The skyline lit up to the east. A jazz quartet in the corner. Linen tablecloths. Silver trays of hors d'oeuvres carried by servers in black. 300 guests. I counted the room by sector the way I always counted things. Business partners, maybe 80. Family, maybe 40. Community and civic connections, maybe 60. And the rest, people who knew my father from the world he had built over 30 years in the city. My father was by the bar with his oldest business friends. Navy suit. His good cufflinks, the ones my mother had given him for their 25th anniversary. He looked the way he always looked at events like this, like a man at the exact center of the life he had always believed he deserved. Marcus was near the jazz quartet, talking too loudly and laughing easily the way he did. He had on a new suit. I noticed the watch on his left wrist was different from the one he usually wore. Something expensive. Something my father had probably given him for this occasion. Desmond Adeyemi was near the dessert table. He saw me across the room and nodded. Slowly.
Once.
I picked up a glass of champagne from a passing tray. Did not drink. At 8:45, my phone buzzed. Vivian. One line. Portal operational. Ready when you are. I read it.
Put the phone back in my clutch.
At 8:55, my father moved to the center of the rooftop. A server handed him a microphone. Someone dimmed the string lights slightly so that all eyes naturally went to him.
He was good at this.
He had always been good at this. He began the way he always began, with the origin story. Lagos, 1987, the $200, the cousin's couch.
The first job.
The first contract. The first warehouse. He had told this story hundreds of times. It still landed. It was true, and true things hold even when the teller has done something that contradicts them. He spoke for 12 minutes. He traced the company's growth. He thanked the employees. He thanked the board. He thanked my mother. He mentioned my grandmother's belief that a person's greatest achievement is what they leave behind. Then he paused, looked at the crowd, found Marcus. Every founder reaches the moment, my father said, when he must ask himself, who carries this forward? Who has the character, the commitment, the understanding of what this truly is? He lifted his champagne glass. Tonight, I am proud to name my son Marcus Okonkwo as co-principal of the Okonkwo Group, effective immediately. Marcus, come here. Marcus walked forward to applause. My father embraced him. Someone let off a small cascade of confetti. The jazz quartet played something triumphant. Marcus took the microphone and gave a speech that was polished and warm and did not mention my name. I stood near the railing with Kemi. My champagne glass was still in my hand, still full. Kemi's fingers found my arm.
Now.
I opened my clutch, took out my phone, unlocked it, opened the IRS portal. The draft submission loaded. 51 pages. 4 submissions, 1 consolidated summary. Every piece of evidence in chronological order. The gray button. Submit filing. My thumb hovered. 9:04 p.m. I pressed it. The screen turned. A loading circle. Then, submission confirmed. Reference number IRS, WB, 26-08847. Timestamp recorded. I closed the app, locked the phone, slid it back into my clutch, raised my champagne glass, took one sip. The bubbles were still cold. The city was still lit. The jazz quartet was still playing. Marcus was still shaking hands near the center of the roof, grinning, holding a glass that his father had handed him. I texted Vivian one word. Confirmed. She replied with a period. Nothing more. That was what we had arranged. The collapse came in pieces. 15 minutes after I pressed send, the company's outside legal counsel, a man named Barrett who I had always found professionally meticulous, received an automated alert. The Okonkwo Group's regulatory monitoring service flagged new activity on an IRS whistleblower reference number associated with the company's EIN. It was a service most construction companies of our size maintained for bonding compliance. Most alerts were routine. This one was not.
Barrett was at the party.
I had not known that. He was near the bar when his phone lit up. I watched him read it without knowing what he was reading. His face did not change dramatically. It changed the way a face changes when something reclassifies itself from minor to serious in the time it takes to read a sentence.
His jaw tightened.
He set down his drink. He walked toward my father. He leaned close to my father's ear. My father's expression dropped the way a curtain drops when the show is over. Not slowly, all at once. My father looked across the room. His eyes moved through the guests, past the quartet, past Desmond, past Marcus, and found me by the railing.
I was holding my champagne glass. Kemi was beside me.
I did not look away. He held my gaze for what felt like a full 30 seconds. Then he turned back to Barrett. Marcus noticed from across the roof. He had been mid-sentence with someone. He crossed the room.
Dad.
What is happening? My father did not answer. Marcus said his name again. My father said, quietly and without looking at him, "Not here, Marcus." Marcus looked at Barrett. Barrett was already on his phone. Marcus looked back at his father.
Then he looked at me.
I was still by the railing, glass in my hand. Still. The whisper moved through the room the way these things always do, not announced, just felt. Board members checking phones. A cluster near the bar, heads together. The jazz quartet played on for another song. Then the band leader looked at my father, received no signal, and after a moment, set his trumpet down. The silence was the kind that replaces music. My father walked back to the center of the roof. He did not look like the man who had stood there 17 minutes ago. He picked up the microphone. His hand was steady. His voice was not. I need to make a brief additional statement. Due to a regulatory matter that has come to our attention this evening, the transition I announced earlier will be paused pending a review. Effective immediately. Marcus was standing 6 feet from the microphone.
He said, "Dad."
What does that mean? My father said, "Marcus, please." Marcus said, "You just told 300 people." My father said, "I know what I said." The roof was still. 300 people not looking at each other. Not quite. The kind of stillness that has weight. I finished my champagne. The party ended before 10 o'clock. Coats retrieved. Awkward goodbyes at the elevator lobby. Happy New Year to the wrong month. People who understood that something had happened, and not what. I found my father in the hotel corridor outside the rooftop entrance. He was sitting on a bench along the wall with his jacket unbuttoned. He looked, as men do when something enormous has collapsed, simply old. He saw me and said, "It was you." I said nothing. He said, "How long?" I said, 11 months. He exhaled. Long and slow. The kind of exhale that empties a room as much as a person. The audit always ran clean. I thought he stopped. I thought you would let it go. You wrote that you would handle it if I flagged it, I said. In an email to Marcus. In your correspondence files. In your home office. He looked at the floor. I knew it was wrong. I told myself it was contained. Small enough to restructure before year-end. $780,000 over 14 months is not small, Dad.
He was quiet for a long time.
He is my son. And I am your daughter, I said. And I kept this company running for 8 years while you gave him a title and a truck and an expense account and decided that was the same thing. He did not argue with that. I had expected him to. He did not. My mother appeared at the end of the corridor. She walked toward us. Her heels clicked on the tile. Her expression was the expression she used when she had already decided what the situation required of her. She looked at me and said, "Rachel, you know how your father is. Keeping it in the bloodline, this is what he was raised to believe. You cannot fault a man for." I said, "I can."
She stopped.
"I can fault him for it," I said. "And I can still love him. Those are not the same thing. And I will not be told that the phrase keeping it in the bloodline is a reason for financial fraud." She opened her mouth, closed it. I turned to my father. "When you are ready to talk about what comes next, call me. Not Marcus. Not Barrett.
Me.
I know where every dollar in that company has gone for 8 years. If there is anything salvageable, I am the only one who can find it." I picked up my clutch. I walked to the elevator. Kemi was already there, waiting, my coat over her arm. She handed it to me, said nothing. We rode down together in silence. The lobby of the Meridian was bright and ordinary. People checking in. A family with suitcases. A man in a hat reading something on his phone. We walked through the glass doors and into the October night.
January.
The aftermath came in exactly the order I had expected it to. First week, the Okonkwo Group filed amended tax documents with the IRS disclosing irregularities in vendor payment records for the prior 14-month period. The company's bonding surety was notified and suspended pending review. Local construction industry press reported that the Okonkwo Group had paused operations pending an internal audit. Second week, Jerome Tate was served with a federal grand jury subpoena at his house in Beaumont. His attorney confirmed service. Tate had no prior criminal record. Tate's attorney began preliminary cooperation discussions the same week. Third week, Marcus was placed on indefinite administrative leave. His access credentials were deactivated. He retained a criminal defense attorney in Houston and was advised not to speak to company personnel or board members pending the investigation. My father did not resign. His attorney advised against it. The company needed operational continuity, and my father remained the sole owner of record. But he stepped back from day-to-day authority, which he communicated to the board in writing, and he authorized the board to appoint interim operational leadership. The board appointed me acting director of operations in addition to my existing finance role. I accepted. My first act was a full vendor audit across all 4 active project sites, every contract reviewed, every payment traced. The audit was complete in 22 business days. I presented it to the board at the end of January. Every other vendor was clean. The 48 employees kept their jobs. The 3 active construction projects kept their contracts. Payroll cleared every 2 weeks without interruption. 2 projects that had been stalled under Marcus's business development commitments were restructured and moved forward. I hired a new operations coordinator, a woman named Christine who had been applying to the company for 3 years and had been passed over each time for reasons nobody could clearly articulate. She started on a Monday. She organized the subcontractor communication system in her first week in a way that I had been wanting someone to do for 2 years. Precious received a promotion to senior administrative manager. She cried for approximately 4 seconds in my office, then composed herself and asked where we wanted to move the filing system. Marcus called me once. I let it go to voicemail. He said he wanted me to know that he had not intended for it to go this far. He said it had started as something small, and he had convinced himself it would not matter. He said he was sorry. He said he hoped we could still be family. I saved the voicemail. I did not return the call. My father wrote me a letter, handwritten, 3 sentences on the personal stationery he had used since as long as I could remember. You were always the foundation. I built on top of you and called it my own work. That is the thing I am most sorry for. I read it twice, folded it, placed it in the top drawer of my desk at the office. I did not reply.
March.
Vivian called to update me on the case status. Total underpayments and fraud amounts under IRS review, approximately $1.3 million including the false insurance documentation and the Beaumont property. Potential civil penalties under consideration. Criminal referral to the Department of Justice pending Tate's cooperation agreement. My whistleblower award eligibility. Between 15 and 30% of any sanctions collected in excess of $2 million, which was the threshold for the enhanced award bracket given the case's complexity and the quality of documentation submitted. She told me to start thinking about what I wanted to do with the number. I told her I was still thinking about the quarterly audit. She said that was a very Rachel answer. I did not disagree. April. The persimmon tree. The tree in my downstairs neighbor's yard had lost its fruit by February. By April, it had new leaves, small, bright green, persistent in the way things are persistent when they are built for surviving the off-season. I had started going for walks in the mornings, something I had never done before. Not for exercise in any disciplined sense, just to be outside before the day started. Before the phone. Before the spreadsheets and the subcontractor calls and the board correspondence and everything that the Okonkwo Group required of me now that I had accepted that it would require things. I passed the tree every morning on my way out of the courtyard. Every morning it was slightly different from the day before. Growing without announcing itself. The company was stable. Not restored, stable. There is a difference. Restoration would take longer. It would require decisions my father and I had not yet made together, conversations we had not yet had, a future we had not yet negotiated. He was still in the house in Bel Air. He was still my father. I still answered when he called, once a week, on Sunday afternoons when my mother put him on the phone for 5 minutes at the end of their usual call to me. We talked about the weather, about the projects, about Christine and Precious and the audit results. We did not talk about the rooftop. There would be time for that. I was not in a hurry. I had learned, over 11 months of staying quiet when staying quiet was the correct strategy, that things that needed to be said could be said when the moment was right. Patience was not weakness. Patience was what let me press a button at 9:04 on a Saturday night while a jazz quartet played and confetti fell and everyone else raised their glasses. I was patient. I was prepared. And I had learned the difference between those two things and being invisible. I used to believe that earning your place meant proving yourself until the right people noticed. I worked earlier and later than anyone else in that building. I fixed problems before they became crises. I stayed when it would have been easier to leave. I believed that eventually the weight of that work would make itself visible, that it would accumulate into something undeniable. What I understand now is that some rooms are designed to look past certain people regardless of what those people do. Not because the people are unseen, but because the room has decided it is more comfortable not to acknowledge what it is seeing. You can double your work and it will be absorbed. You can save the company and it will be called the company saving itself. This is not a failure of effort. It is a structural decision being made by someone with the authority to make it. What changes things is not more effort inside the system. What changes things is accountability that lives outside of it. I pressed that button at 9:04 not because I wanted my brother to fall. I pressed it because 48 families had their financial security tied to a company that was being hollowed out. Because a regulatory system existed precisely for this situation, and I had the knowledge and the documentation to use it correctly. Because being quiet had always been mistaken for being compliant, and I was done letting those two things be confused. The persimmon tree in my neighbor's yard grows whether anyone is looking at it or not. It does not ask permission to fruit. It does not wait for the right season to be acknowledged. It simply grows, and then one October, there is something there that was not there before. Orange, round, heavier than it looks. That is what I was doing all those months. That is what the 11 months of documentation and silence and patience actually were. I was not waiting. I was growing something that nobody could take credit for when it finally arrived. The truth does not need a jazz quartet or a 300-person guest list or a microphone and confetti. It just needs someone who documented it carefully and pressed send at the right moment. That is my story. 11 months of evidence and one text at 9:04. If this reminded you of your own moment, the one where you kept working while someone else got the title, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment below.
Subscribe.
And I will see you in the next one.